Welcome to the deep dive, where we take a whole load of information and really boil it down for you. Just the useful bits, the stuff that makes you go, aha.
Exactly. No fluff, just the core knowledge.
And today we're doing a custom deep dive. It's all about Kesser's ideas for a blueberry booster fertilizer using fermentation.
Right. And we're looking at his notes, his thinking, and also his chat with Professor Hendricks about it all, including some potential, adjustments.
Okay, let's jump right in. What first caught Kesser's eye? It was the beech tree, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's fascinating how he honed in on using these freely available natural things, specifically beech buds. He was curious about what's actually in them.
And Hendricks had the answer, apparently.
He did. Hendricks explained that these young buds, the really fresh ones, are just packed with organic acids, amino acids, and crucially, easily soluble carbohydrates.
The stuff the tree needs to grow fast in spring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for us, or rather for the fertilizer idea, they're rich in nitrogen compounds too.
But not like a massive hit of nitrogen, more subtle.
Precisely. Hendricks called it a herbal tea for the microbes, a gentle boost for the plants, not like dumping manure on them.
Right, which makes sense for feeding the soil life around blueberries.
Absolutely. And Hendricks also mentioned fermenting the beech buds with other green stuff, nettles, dandelions.
Things with maybe different nutrient profiles?
Yeah, to balance it out. Nettles are great for nitrogen, for example. Helps create this, thriving little ecosystem in the soil.
Okay, and Kesser was also interested in the carbohydrates in those beech shoots. What did Hendricks say about those?
Well, he confirmed they're full of simple sugars, glucose, fructose, sucrose, quick energy.
That the tree is pulling from its reserves for that spring spurt.
Exactly. And he also mentioned in the very young shoots, you might get tiny amounts of pectin-like stuff, polysaccharides, more complex.
Which the microbes can break down later.
Right, potentially releasing more nutrients over time. So those sugars are really the fuel for the whole fermentation process we're aiming for.
Okay, so that leads us to Kesser's idea. Combine the beech parts, the sugary bits, with seaweed, and use cold fermentation. Why that combo?
The idea there is creating a slower, more persistent food source for the microbes.
The seaweed brings minerals, the beech brings sugars.
Exactly. And it releases more slowly in a cold ferment. Hendricks also noted, though, that adding some extra nitrogen, maybe those nettles again, or clover, makes it even better.
A more complete meal for the microbe.
You got it. Helps keep everything thriving. The lactic acid bacteria, the cellulose decomposers, they all get something out of it.
Speaking of lactic acid bacteria, LIB, Kesser seemed to know a bit about them already.
He was definitely on the right path. Hendricks confirmed, LAD are pretty much everywhere. On plants, in the soil, in the air.
So they're naturally present.
Especially abundant on fresh, unsprayed green stuff, like dandelion, plantain, red clover, nettles. They're teeming with them.
So this is interesting. If you use fresh herbs like that in your mix with the beech and seaweed, you might not need a special starter culture, unlike, say, bokashi.
That's a key point Hendricks made. Bokashi usually relies on adding an inoculated bran, EM,
Right.
But here, just mixing fresh, unsprayed herbs with the beech shoots and seaweed or maybe grass, that often provides enough natural L-bear to get things going.
As long as it's kept right.
Yeah, reasonably airtight, moist conditions. Hendricks had a great analogy. He called it a slower, more willing wine.
Huh, I like that.
The beet sugars and the nitrogen from the green herbs feed the bacteria, and things like eelgrass give it some structure.
Okay, but Hendricks also had this other idea, didn't he? A beautifully geeky one involving beer?
Ah, yes, the wild starter, using Trappist beer residue. It's brilliant, really.
How does that work?
You take a small container, put in some beech buds, and add the dregs from a Trappist beer, the yeast and whatever else is in there.
So you're mixing microbes.
Exactly. The yeast from the beer, plus the natural microbes on the buds and in the air, they kickstart a really active microbiological process.
Like a little microbial task force.
Pretty much. And then you can add that starter to your bigger bucket of beech, seaweed, and herbs.
Give the main batch a real head start. Okay, now they also talked about aerobic versus anaerobic. Why does that matter for this blueberry fertilizer?
It's actually a crucial difference. It affects what kind of microbes thrive and, well, frankly, how it smells.
Right.
They distinguish between making a liquid fertilizer focused on general microbial activity, maybe in a bucket that's not fully sealed, allowing some air in.
Versus bokashi, which is totally oxygen-free.
Exactly. Hendricks pointed out that a bit more air, a semi-open bucket, encourages a wider range of microbes, including aerobic decomposers.
The ones that need oxygen.
Right. And they can be really helpful in breaking down certain things and, importantly, preventing those really nasty smells, like hydrogen sulfide, that rotten egg smell you can sometimes get, especially with seaweed or eelgrass.
Okay, so managing the air influences the microbial team and the smell. Good to know. What about the conditions for that wild starter, the beer one?
For that, Hendricks suggested keeping it somewhat closed lid, maybe just slightly ajar and warm for a few days.
To let the fermentation get going.
Yeah, build up a good head of steam, microbially speaking. You'll know it's ready when it smells kind of sour-sweet. Definitely not rotten or putrid.
That's the lactic acid brew starting up.
Precisely. That's what you then add to your main mix.
And temperature. Is there an ideal range?
There is. Hendricks reckoned 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, so about 50 to 60 Fahrenheit, especially with some spring sun, is perfect.
Why that range?
It really encourages the lactic acid bacteria and those other beneficial soil decomposers to multiply. He called a black bucket in the sun a microbiological greenhouse.
Warming it up nicely.
Yeah, favoring the bacteria, that transition zone, not fully aerobic, not fully anaerobic.
Okay. And you can even reuse stuff from old ferments.
Yeah. Another neat trick from Hendricks, use a spoonful of the liquid from an old batch of fermented weeds, maybe alongside the beech buds and beer dregs.
Like a sourdough starter.
Exactly like sourdough. You're carrying over that active microbial culture. Just let that new starter mix develop for a day or two in a warm spot before adding it to the main bucket.
And again, trust your nose.
Always. If the main mix smells sour or maybe sweet and earthy, you're on the right track. If it smells rotten, something's gone wrong.
Got it. Now, Steen had a different idea involving a black plastic bag. What was that about?
Ah, the tumble compost post. It's a clever alternative to a bucket. Creates a slightly different environment.
How so?
Well, a black bag heats up fast in the sun, holds moisture well. You fill it with maybe dry and fresh beech leaves, the trachis culture, maybe seaweed or herbs too.
It becomes
The sort of spongy fermenting mass. It sits that interesting zone between aerobic and anaerobic because air transfer is different than in a rigid bucket.
And you can tumble it.
Right. Tumbling mixes it, spreads the heat and moisture. Hendricks called it a natural bioreactor.
Sounds potentially quite active, maybe smelly.
Steen acknowledged it might get a bit pungent. But the dark liquid that drains off can be diluted with rainwater and used as a soil conditioner. Good for boosting the soil around blueberries, just maybe not right next to the patio.
Fair enough. Then there was the smelly cat bucket. What's the story there?
That sounds like a more set it and forget it system. A bucket, maybe with seaweed, designed with an overflow for rainwater.
So it's slow release.
Very slow release. Nutrients gradually leach out as it ferments and rain washes through. Ideal for really hungry plants like pumpkins was the example, but you could adapt it for blueberries.
And the plant itself helps.
Yeah, the idea is the plant's canopy, like big pumpkin leaves or maybe dense blueberry bushes, helps keep the ground underneath moist, making the slow-release fertilizer more effective.
What about using the end product, the fermented stuff from the bag or bucket? After harvest, maybe?
Hendricks had a specific suggestion for strawberries, actually, which could apply to blueberries too. After fruiting, put the fermented material between the rows.
Not right on the plants.
No, between them. It helps support root growth and nutrient gathering for next year's crop.
And the seaweed component is good for berries.
Especially good. Provides potassium, trace minerals, without too much nitrogen late in the season, which you often want to avoid.
It's really interesting how they're thinking in cycles, planning ahead, testing things out.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sustainable gardening. They talked about actually trying these different brews on blueberries, maybe even keeping a log.
To see what works best.
Yeah, maybe even create the ultimate blueberry booster liquid from that bag method, for instance. It's all about observation and tweaking.
Now, Kesser also threw garlic into the mix as a possibility. Why garlic?
Garlic tops, specifically, are high in sulfur compounds. These can apparently stimulate microbial activity.
So adding garlic could boost the fermentation.
Potentially, yes. Combining it with the nitrogen from beech buds creates what was called a superfood for the decomposer microbes. Could make the whole process more vigorous.
Does garlic have other effects? It's known for being, well, antimicrobial sometimes.
It does have a mild antibacterial effect, yeah. Which, in this context, might actually be beneficial, helping to steer the fermentation towards the good microbes, keeping others in check.
Adds another layer of complexity.
A different flavor, microbiologically speaking. So garlic and beech buds together could be a really good starting point for a mild, nutritious liquid feed for blueberries.
And then there was the idea of fermenting garlic with sugar.
Right, taking it another step, essentially creating a fermentation within a fermentation almost.
How does that work?
The sugar is easy food for beneficial bacteria, like LNAB. The garlic brings its own microbial activity and that potent flavor or activating boost.
So you're making a kind of super starter.
Kind of, yeah. It creates a great environment for LNAB to multiply, and the garlic's properties help keep the process healthy. Over time, it becomes like a fermented syrup.
And you could use that syrup.
As a starter itself for a bigger batch of blueberry booster, or maybe diluted as a mild soil fertilizer on its own.
How long does that take, the garlic sugar ferment?
The suggestion was to let it sit for maybe a couple of weeks. You'd look for bubbling, a slightly sour smell developing. That tells you it's active.
Another potential boost for plants needing some nutrition and microbial help. And preparing the garlic for any of this, do you need to peel it or anything?
No, Hendricks said just give it a rinse if it's got dirt on it. But don't peel it or clean it too thoroughly.
Why not?
The natural microbes on the skin can actually help the fermentation along. So keep it simple. A quick rinse is fine.
Wow, okay. This has been quite the journey into Kesser's fermentation ideas for blueberries. And Professor Hendricks's input was really insightful.
Absolutely. It really highlights the potential in using things readily available, beech buds, seaweed, even beer dregs, to make something beneficial for your plants, like blueberries, just through natural fermentation.
Yeah, definitely some aha moments there for me. That wild starter concept and understanding how air or lack of it changes things, that was really clear.
It really makes you think about that invisible world of microbes, doesn't it, working away in the soil, and how these simple techniques can harness their power.
It does. Which maybe raises a question for you listening. Have you thought about the microbes in your garden? And could you use some of these ideas, these simple fermentation tricks, to maybe create your own unique boosters for your blueberries or whatever you're growing?
Maybe this deep dive has given you some food for thought, some ideas for your own garden experiments. Definitely worth exploring.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a whole load of information and really boil it down for you